Can a sitting president simply end a program that protects hundreds of thousands of undocumented immigrants who were brought to the United States as children? More specifically, could President Donald Trump legally terminate DACA? That was the question at the heart of a major Supreme Court case. Department of Homeland Security versus Regents of the University of California. And the court's answer may surprise you. DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It was created in 2012 by President Barack Obama through executive action. DACA allowed certain undocumented immigrants brought to the U.S. as children to apply for temporary protection from deportation and to receive work permits. These individuals became known as dreamers. To qualify, they had to meet strict criteria, like having no serious criminal record, being in school or the military, and having arrived before 2007. DACA never granted permanent legal status, but it gave recipients some breathing room and stability. Why did DACA exist in the first place? In the years leading up to 2012, Congress debated multiple versions of the DREAM Act, a bill that would have provided a path to permanent residency for young immigrants brought to the country as children. But despite bipartisan support, those bills never passed. Frustrated by gridlock in Congress, the Obama administration turned to executive action. DACA was presented as a temporary measure, meant to protect a vulnerable group, while Congress worked toward a more permanent solution. Fast forward to 2017. The Trump administration announced that it would begin phasing out DACA. Attorney General Jeff Sessions argued that the program was unlawful, saying the executive branch had no authority to create such a broad immigration policy without Congress. The Department of Homeland Security followed with a memo formally rescinding DACA. That triggered a wave of lawsuits. The most prominent were filed by the University of California, several states, and DACA recipients themselves. Their argument was simple. The administration hadn't followed proper legal procedures when it tried to end the program. And that dispute made its way to the Supreme Court. The Trump administration argued that DACA was illegal from the start and could therefore be ended at any time. The challengers focused instead on the process. They said the government's explanation was vague and incomplete, and that it ignored the serious harm the decision would cause for nearly 700,000 people who had built their lives around the program. When the case reached the Supreme Court, the justices pressed both sides. Some asked whether courts should even be reviewing this kind of executive decision at all, since immigration policy is usually left to the political branches. Others pushed the administration's lawyers to explain why their rescission memo was so thin on details and why it failed to address what lawyers call reliance interests. The idea that when the government creates a policy and people make life-changing decisions based on it, those consequences must be considered before the policy is reversed. In June 2020, the court ruled 5-4 against the Trump administration. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the majority opinion. Importantly, he did not decide whether DACA itself was legal. Instead, the court said the way the administration tried to end DACA was unlawful because it violated the Administrative Procedure Act, also known as the APA. The APA is a federal law passed in 1946. It makes sure government agencies follow fair procedures when they make rules or decisions. It requires agencies to explain their actions clearly, to consider important factors, to weigh alternatives, and to avoid acting in a way that is arbitrary and capricious. In plain English, government decisions can't be rushed, sloppy, or poorly reasoned, especially when people's lives are on the line. Roberts said the Department of Homeland Security failed to consider key issues when it ended DACA. It didn't weigh how many people would lose jobs. It didn't consider the impact on schools, the military, or communities. And it didn't even look at middle ground options, like letting current recipients keep protections while stopping new applications. Because of those omissions, the court ruled the rescission arbitrary and capricious, and therefore unlawful. Not everyone agreed. Justice Clarence Thomas, joined by Justices Samuel Alito and Neil Gorsuch, dissented. Thomas argued the court was asking the wrong question. In his view, DACA was unlawful from the start because it bypassed Congress. If that was true, he said, the Trump administration didn't need to justify ending it. It could shut the program down outright. Thomas also criticized the majority's use of the APA. He said it was never meant to stop a president from reversing a previous president's executive action, especially in sensitive areas like immigration and national security. In his words, by relying on the APA, the court had hijacked the Constitution. Justice Brett Kavanaugh wrote a separate dissent. He agreed that the government's explanation for ending DACA was weak, but he pointed out that the Department of Homeland Security had issued a second, more detailed memo after the lawsuits began. He argued that the court should have taken that later explanation into account, rather than focusing only on the original rescission memo. So what did the ruling mean for Dreamers? The court didn't declare DACA legal. It only said the Trump administration failed to end it properly. That left the door open for a future administration to try again, as long as it followed the correct process. For Dreamers, the decision was a temporary reprieve, not permanent protection, and DACA has remained in legal limbo ever since. Lower courts have continued to wrestle with whether the program itself is lawful, and Congress has still not passed a permanent legislative fix. The case also carried broader implications. It sent a message that even presidents, when acting through their agencies, must respect administrative law. It reinforced the principle that process matters. The ruling also sparked political debate. Supporters of DACA hailed it as a victory for fairness and stability. Critics argued it was a judicial overreach that kept an unlawful policy alive. In the end, the Supreme Court didn't resolve the fundamental question of DACA's legality. It simply ruled that the Trump administration went about rescinding it the wrong way. The case was a reminder of how intertwined law, policy, and politics can be, and how much is at stake for hundreds of thousands of people living in the United States. So, can a president end DACA? The answer is yes, but only if they follow the law. Even the most powerful office in the land has to obey rules like the APA. And as the Supreme Court showed in this case, process matters. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe, enable notifications, and check out our other videos to stay informed.